Thanks everybody for joining us. I appreciate you being here. What's FastTrack? FastTrack is the internal system that we use for our recruitment, right? We actually use it internally as the applicant tracking system. FastTrack is the version of it that we sell in the store, but it's basically the exact same thing. There are a couple minor differences between what's in the store and what we use internally, but for the most part, it functions the same way. So basically, whenever we're looking to hire somebody new, and basically anybody that's been hired within the last 6 or 7 months would have gone through this process. And prior to that, we had a different application that handled this. FastTrack has basically, I'll say, 4 levels of different tickets. We start at the top with job descriptions, and that's exactly what it is, right? It's just a description of the position that we are potentially hiring for. So lots of us are TCs or architects, whatever, BPCs. That's just essentially the job title and some description around it. Pretty standard stuff here, right? Title, short description, whether or not the record's active, responsibilities, qualifications. All this is basically optional other than a description of the title and so forth. We can also enter a specific job code. So this isn't really used internally, but for a customer that might use this, maybe there's a specific job code that they need to associate with this job title. And we put that in here. If the job requisition, we'll talk to in a second, needs to be approved by anybody specifically, we can identify which group will handle that for this job description. We identify the rate range for the position. And down at the bottom of this is really kind of what makes this system special. So FastTrack is essentially built to be completely configured by non-technical people using the system, right? That have the opportunity to basically configure these things how they see fit. And what I mean by that is they can dynamically generate tasks and interviews and approvals within the system. And that's what these FastTrack activities are down here. So they can basically specify for this particular job description, I want these particular activities. Like any ServiceNow list, I can go ahead and edit that. We can put this sample interview in here, or sample approval, whatever. And they can basically rearrange where those things are going to go. You'll notice that all these things have an application stage, job application stage, as well as an order. So things that are in the same stage will fire either in series or in parallel within that stage. So anything that it has the same order number within the same stage will fire in parallel. Anything that's ordered one right after another will happen serially. So I'm going to go ahead and we're just going to switch real quick, because that's really the meat of this thing, right? This is a very adaptable system without a lot of technical knowledge. Obviously, there was quite a lot of work that went into making it this way, but once it's up and running, it's very easy for a non-technical person to go ahead and reconfigure a given job description, job rec, even a specific job application as they see fit. All right, so I'm just going to jump over to the activities real quick, right? So these are the building blocks of this thing. We'll take a look at this sample task that we have. So this is pretty straightforward, right? But as a recruiter or an HR person, I can come in here, I can define one of these things, give it a title, what type of activity is it, right? So we already talked about tasks and interviews, approvals. We can also execute subflows, which we'll get into in a second. They can specify at which portion of the job application this particular task is going to fire. Like we saw before, the order in which it's going to fire, whether or not we want to default this on new job descriptions. So this one's checked. So if we come back over here, and we'll just create a new one called Caddy. And we'll go ahead and just save this. What will happen is at the bottom, anything that was marked as a default is going to get copied in here automatically. But like I was showing you before, we can go ahead and customize it even further if we wanted to. Let's switch back over to the activity for a second. But basically, we can customize that even further, right? So we have this conditions builder right here. It's always based on the job application, right? They can't change that, but they can say within a particular job application, I only want this task to fire. Let's say if the offered rate is greater than, let's say, $100,000, right? So you can really customize these things. So even though this might be included in a specific job description, it's only going to fire if we end up offering that particular job applicant over $100,000. And again, it's real easy for them to customize these things. So internally, I can show you some of that. Well, obviously, we can't show you all of it because there's some sensitive information. But we have certain tasks that only fire, you know, if it's contractor or in other special conditions. That's basically it, right? These are the basic Lego bricks that make this whole thing work. These configurable bricks that they can utilize. So I was mentioning earlier that internally we use the ATS system. It's basically the same thing, but it's just been rebranded. And over here they have a much longer name, but you can see we have a whole lot of different types of activities that are happening, right? Most of them are different interview types depending on the position that we're hiring for, right? So we have different interviews for different positions. Okay, so let's go back to the job description. And underneath this, we can see we have one requisition. So the levels, again, are job description being a top level, job requisition. So we need a specific technical consultant, whatever the position is. So we open up a requisition. So go ahead and do new here. So at this level, this is where we're specifying, okay, who's the recruiter assigned to this thing? Who's the hiring company? Who's the hiring manager? So we have some options here, whether or not we want to close this requisition when we hire somebody. So we have, internally, we have two different types of requisitions, right? We have requisitions that stay open essentially indefinitely. And then we have requisitions where we're just hiring a specific role once. So for those ones, you know, we would specify close the requisition on hire. We also have the option to basically email all the candidates that weren't hired in mass when this thing gets closed out, just like beneath. Right, so now when we save that, the same activities that we specified at the job description level are automatically populated down here. And again, we can edit these, right? So just because we needed these specific tasks for a given job description, we don't necessarily need them for this particular requisition, or maybe we need an extra one. So we can customize it at this level as well. As far as the ServiceNow is concerned, these are just tasks, right? It's just an extension of task, nothing really special going on here. One thing that I will mention, and this is true for all the tasks within FastTrack, is we don't expose the state field at all. This was actually an idea that Travis came up with. So we have this thing called stage, and basically it's doing the same thing. And what it does is in the background is actually setting the state independently. So they can come up with a whole list of different stages that they want, but it doesn't actually change the state field at all in the background. I'll just show you the stages here. So I was mentioning basically we have these for every level that's a task within this application, right? So we have FastTrack tasks, we have interviews, we have the job application, and we have the job requisition. The job description, on the other hand, is not actually a task. It is just a standalone table. But in here, we can specify, you know, different stages that we want displayed within the individual, you know, job rec in this case, or the job app, whatever the case may be. The other thing that is kind of cool is these are dynamic, right? So you see the chevrons at the top, right? We're all familiar with those, mainly from probably change or demand. We're utilizing them here too. But what will happen is, let's just select requisition for a second. Let's go ahead and add a new stage for requisitions. We'll set this to 900. And that's going to be here, we're going to specify which state it is. So we'll say it's closed and complete, not the default, but we can, if we want to, we can set one of these stages as the initial one, and we can set one of them as the default close stage. So go ahead and submit that. Is the chevrons automatically adjust, right? So we've added that. You know, obviously, normally that's a manual step that we have to take. Automated that into the process. So if a customer decides to add stages or remove stages, whatever the case may be, the chevrons will automatically adjust accordingly. So from the requisition, we'll open up an application, job application, right? So this is an individual person actually applying for a role. From here, we actually need to select a specific applicant. So we'll go ahead and just choose the magnifying glass, and we'll select David Pumpkin, that Ace entered in here. And we'll save that. So again, this is just as far as ServiceNow is concerned, this is just a standard task. Nothing special going on. We're using the stages at the top again, and those are, like I said just a minute ago, those are dynamic. They'll adjust as needed. We'll come down to the bottom. So here is where these actual activities come into play, right? So we're on a specific job application, and these things will happen automatically as we get to this stage of the job application, right? So our first one is actually going to be the sample task that's in the applied state. We came in here, right? We're in the applied stage. We've got list one task, and I went ahead and created it automatically. We could have changed it, right? So sample task, if we didn't want that, we could have theoretically edited it, but in reality, we can only edit it if it's not in the applied stage, because this is the very first stage. We don't have enough time to actually modify this thing. Any of the further ones we could have. Again, this is pretty straightforward, right? It's just a task to do something. So most of the tasks that we have are going to be during the onboarding state, as far as the task that we need to do when somebody new starts. Okay, yeah, like here we go. We've got two tasks. One of these is already done. It was the offer letter task, and that happened during the salary negotiation stage. And this is where we actually generate the offer letter that goes out, right? So these, oops, this one's blank. But what happens is when these tasks are generated, depending on conditions, we generate these dynamic PDFs, right? So in this case, it would be an offer letter, but we can literally generate anything that we need to. So the one area that I haven't talked about so far, up until that point, was these PDF forms under FastTrack. So again, we can dynamically generate these things depending on conditions, right? They're going to be dependent on the task, and from there we can dot walk up, right? So in this case, this particular task is, or this particular PDF is only going to get generated if the activity type is a sample offer letter from the FastTrack task perspective, right? But then we can get anything from the job application or the job applicant. And you can see down here at the bottom, if you're familiar with the notifications, the email notifications, these work exactly the same way, right? So we can specify, okay, here's the applicant name, here's their address, here's the current date. So just like the notifications, you can do script, right? So this is just formatting date, month, year, day, year. We can pull in the salary information, the job description title, all that good stuff. We format it, using your typical HTML formatting that you need. So that's not entirely new. So we've used something similar to that for a long time, even previous to ATS, but it's very flexible now, right? So previously, it would be difficult for us to change which PDFs were generated when. We can now just essentially conditionally build them. Again, we'll just take a look at the scripts. These are just normal server-side scripts, right? You can do pretty much anything you need to do right inside here. It's called script include. get data from other tables, whatever you need to do. This one's pretty straightforward. It's just formatting the date.
I was going to ask, so right now you can export these as PDF. Is there any plan in the future, or is there any capability now to export as HTML so you can put out on a company website?
That's a good question, David. No plans at the moment, but that's a good idea. So one of the things this thing does not have, and something I'd like to have added, and this is kind of out of my realm, but is essentially a portal for the applicant, right? A service portal for the applicant, where we can present them their own list of tasks, and maybe, like you said, maybe the PDF or an HTML of the offer letter right there, something like that.
Yeah, that'd be nice if a website led to a public portal where folks could apply for jobs that way.
Yep. So internally, this does post to our website. Now, for those of you that don't know, we were using ServiceNow itself to host our public website. That's recently changed, so we're now using a Wix site. But in either case, when the job application, when the requisitions reach a specific point, they do get posted out to that website, and the person can apply. It's not very dynamic, right? It's just a simple form that they're filling out, and then that's coming back into the system. And what it does is it'll create an application record, or an applicant record rather. So the applicant really just represents the person, right? This record never changes, sort of. What I should say is that we only have one of these per person, right? But this applicant can be linked to as many different job requisitions as need be. So that's a pretty major change from the way this used to work prior to the FastTrack system. Essentially, the old record was kind of an all-encompassing record. It was the requisition, it was the applicant, it was the job application, all rolled into one table. Now it's split apart to make that a little more easy to handle, a little more dynamic. Pretty basic information here on the applicant, though, right? It's just like our user records in ServiceNow. Obviously, there's some custom stuff that we're doing here. What's the current salary, if we can ask, whether or not they have a clearance, if they're willing to relocate. Once we hire somebody on, we'll tie this to a user record in the system. So part of the process internally, I was mentioning earlier, this I can show because it's no big deal. Part of the process internally is to create that user record, and the way that happens is we have an activity that essentially triggers a subflow. So the whole process behind the scenes, and I'll show you in a second, is actually running in the Flow Designer. The old process ran in the workflow engine, the traditional workflow engine. When we retooled this, built a platform again from the ground up, we decided to use Flow Designer because that was basically that comment that ServiceNow had directly made. Hey, is this something you guys can do in Flow Designer? And so we did, right? The whole process that activates those dynamic tasks and so forth is built in Flow Designer. Yeah, so speaking of subflows, I was mentioning, we create a user account, so that happens as part of the subflow. So one of the activity types that we can do as part of the dynamic engine is just executing another flow. So in this case, we have this flow called create user account, and it handles the whole bits behind that. We don't have to muddy the waters of the normal flow with it. So you can literally do anything else that you need to, right? So I can't do this. Well, create a flow for it, and then you can do that. And that could be something simple, like just setting some field values, or it could be something much more complicated where we're adding a bunch of new tasks as part of kind of a group that, I don't know, for whatever reason we couldn't handle during using the normal method. Basically, if you can't do it within the existing framework, you can create another flow to do what you need to do. All right, so that's kind of a good segue into showing you what's behind the scenes here, right? As far as the designer flow is concerned. So there's one main workflow, and that's this one here. It's the job application task flow. We have a couple of other ones. I showed you the one internally that we're using for creating users, but we have some for task closure and interview closure. These are just specific things that we need to trigger when those things happen. But this one's kind of the juicy one because there's a lot going on inside of it, as you might imagine. To make all that work in the front end, there's a lot of checks in here. Basically, when we come into a stage, we don't need to get into every single detail of this, but when we come into a particular stage during the workflow, we're checking, okay, do we have any activities that we need to fire in a particular, in this particular stage, in this particular order? Then we're checking, okay, what type of thing is it, right? Is it that task? Is it an interview? Is it an approval? Is it a subflow? We're updating, and again, some of this really gets into the nuts and bolts of how this works, so I won't talk about everything, but essentially we're updating, you know, the different order number within the application that we're actually currently in. So we have to keep track of that, obviously. So actually this won't even be visible on here, but you can see some of it. Yeah, I've hidden most of the details that actually make this work. But there's another table essentially that keeps track of all the things that should happen. And this is handling the actual triggering of those events and writing back to that table as well. So some of the things that are really custom for this, we have some custom activity types. One, just to retrieve a system property. So believe it or not, at least as far as New York was concerned when this was built, that didn't exist. There's no activity to get a system property for whatever reason. So create one. Anything that's handling the staging is obviously custom. So we're just, you know, in this case, we're getting what's the next stage that we need to fire. And we're checking to see if it's the last stage. A lot of this is out of the box flow designer, but there's a few things, check conditions. This one that I just showed you, the launch flow. These are all custom activities within Flow Designer itself. So if we take a look at this one, right, we're inputting the property name, and out of that, we're just doing an if statement, and it's looking at whatever that step outputted. In this case, it was just a true value, or we're checking for true, right? Did this output true? If it did, then we're going to go ahead and move on.
Aaron, is there a way with Flow Designer to, in the task, see where the workflow is, like you could with the old workflow?
So one that's actually executing.
Right, right. So yeah, you can look at executions, right? But it's not the same. It's not the. I mean, you don't get the view. And
yeah, you're right.
Yeah. Okay. I was just curious if there was something
I don't know
discovered while working this. Yeah.
I mean,
you
the
one thing that I find to be a
where
problem.
it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not quite as clean, but I mean, like here you can see that we're at this particular step, right? This wait for condition, we're waiting on that.
There may be
but
a
you're
table
right, it's not quite as same.
that action number, because they are numbered, right? So you could potentially find that action number.
You're saying this, Jared?
Yeah.
Right here? Maybe. Yep. I haven't actually looked.
Yeah.
Did you have a specific use case in mind, David, that this has come up?
No. I recently built something similar, but just with workflow, not with Flow Designer, and it's just for a catalog item. So it's a dynamic activity type thing, and that's one of the problems that I ran into. I didn't use Designer was because of it didn't have the old show workflow, key in there. Right. So I was wondering if there was anything you did to adapt for that, like a list of activities or anything to show which activity it's on. I was just curious.
I mean, that you can kind of just tell in the platform itself. You can see what step is currently open. But no, not as far as like Flow Designer itself is concerned. I know you can, similar to show workflow, I believe there's a UI action that allows you to jump to the execution for this particular one. But I mean, if you don't care for the way this looks in the first place, it might not be worth it.
Yeah, not to say I don't like it. It's just something I'd have to get used to, I think.
Yeah. But in general, I do like Flow Designer. I think it's very user friendly. For people that are non-technical, it's a lot easier to build these types of flows than it was to build Flow Designer. And I like the workflow engine rather.
Yeah.
And I like the workflow engine plenty. This has grown on me quite a bit.
Yep. Awesome.
All right. Yeah, no problem. anytime. Trying to think if there's anything else that I want to call out in here. I don't think so. I mean, you guys kind of get the idea, right? So the basic premise behind this thing is it's checking the various tables and the conditions behind those activities to see when we should fire a record, if we should fire a record, and then keep on processing. So this whole thing makes it really, really adaptable for non-technical people because they never need to change this flow. They're just adding those activities that we first talked about. Yeah, I mean, the idea here is, right, there's twofold, right? Internally, we use this specifically for the recruiting, and it works well because it's very flexible for them. The other part of it that I kind of want to highlight really is just the flexibility itself, right? Just because we're using these things for an applicant tracking system doesn't mean that we couldn't turn around and, with some adaptation, obviously, basically duplicate this for any other process that we wanted to, right? So this could be completely generic. We'd have to set up some kind of table structure to make it work, but the idea would be the same, right? You can have your list of dynamic activities, the conditions behind those, whatever you want to do, and then fire, set up a system for users to fire basically any sets of tasks that they so desired, and they're able to configure them, right? That's really kind of the beauty of this application is, or the core behind the application is really the adaptability behind it, right? This is not necessarily limited to just job applications and the job applicant process, right? You can, with that minor adaptation, we could turn around and use this for basically anything that we wanted to, as long as it's a straightforward task-based process, right? There was one other piece that I haven't shown you within the interviews that I just wanted to quickly highlight. If we can, I might not actually have any. Oh, we do, good. So when interviews are created, one of the activity pieces here is basically we specify which interviewers are going to be part of this. So that it can be hard-coded, it can be a group, whatever we so choose. When the actual interview gets created, then those people get assigned to it automatically, obviously. And then they get a survey to actually take. And for us, what we're doing, let's see if we can actually see this. Yeah, so this is just a sample one that was created. They'll get a survey about the applicant, right? So when they're going through the interview process, they can fill out all the details about how they felt this person did, what their experience level was like, make any comments. And these are just standard surveys within the tool, right? So if we were to sell this to a client, they can, add any surveys that they want. And those can be dynamic, again, based on, for a specific type of job that we're hiring for, whatever the case may be. We can customize those pretty heavily, right? That's not specific to just our needs. So I'll just show you a few of the ones that are in our system. So you can see Andrina and Haley and Shane actually set these up for them, set up a bunch of different interview types depending on the position. It's got quite a lot of questions. But basically what happens is, they fill out their survey, and all the survey results end up back in the interview. So as they fill them out, all the comments are automatically added to this task, which then the recruiter can go in and see without having to dive into each individual survey. And that's really about it. I think I've covered all of the major bases within the application. I showed you the workflow, but I'm happy to answer any other questions I can. If you guys, ever want to check out anything more in depth, I'm more than happy to speak with you individually, and we can